Thank you.
Thank you.
So here the TV to the rescue with, here's where these schools are making the money. At the time, Pac-12 signed a deal roughly for $21 million a year. I'm going to go to an article that's more up to date with this. I think this is one of those fascinating things, though, again, to just track about with the haves and have-nots. So again, got Elias here in the San Diego State garb, so I'll use that one. But it's one of the reasons that San Diego State has tried so desperately to try to get into one of these Power 5 conferences, just because of the amount of money. So does anybody know the name of the conference that San Diego State's in right now?
Mountain West.
Mountain West. Anybody have any idea what the TV revenue is for each Mountain West member?
5 million.
1.5 million. So just, and these are old numbers, I'm going to show you the new numbers, but just using these numbers, San Diego State's trying to compete against UCLA and USC, whether it's in football or basketball or whatever else. Yet just right off the top, there's essentially a $20 million gap in revenue for, in my mind, doing nothing more or less. So when you take that 20 million and you look what you're enhancing your facilities, or maybe hire a little better coaches or better operational and administrative staff or whatever to do those things, you get some of that have-not. They just hired a new athletic director, and he's talked about one of the biggest things he's concerned with right now is what at San Diego State. We just talked about it here with the MLS thing. But it's trying to get a football stadium.
Oh, yeah.
So the hope is with that football stadium that you can make it a bigger deal, you can sell it out, you can get some corporate sponsorships. But what they've been told from these Power 5 schools is that is a huge part of the equation. Here's one of the challenges. Most people talk about, well, naturally, geographically, wouldn't the Pac-12 make sense for San Diego State? Sounds good, but the challenge is, essentially the Pac-12 already has the San Diego TV market. It doesn't offer anything new to the Pac-12. So from the Pac-12's eyes, why should we add another member who's going to cut into our overall cut for each of us schools? So that's why there's probably their best bet, and there's a little more talk of the Big 12, which we just talked about. Big 12 lost some schools, they're at 10. They're trying to figure out, maybe you've heard from a football standpoint, do they want to have a conference playoff at the end or not? At the end of the day, as goofy as it sounds, San Diego State's probably a better fit for the Big 12 because that opens up another market that the Big 12 currently doesn't have, which is where it gets into all these TV contracts. So as we look at this, I want to go through this article just because it's the most recent and up-to-date addressing these. Again, even the title, 5 college conferences that bring in over $250 million a year. So this even details some of it. Bowl game revenue is a combination of money from college football playoff, which distributed some $400 million among 10 conferences last year in contract bowls. So conferences, when you qualify as a team, your conference gets money from that bowl. Right? In essence, this $400 million went to these 10 conferences. NCAA's tournament's prize money system operates on a 6-year rolling period, with conferences receiving around $250,000 per tournament game played over the last 6 seasons. So this is now NCAA's tournaments, it's talking about the college basketball tournament. So if you didn't know that, for essentially each round your conference wins in the NCAA tournament, you get $250,000. So it's huge to have your team from your conference, even if maybe it wasn't you, you want your teams to do well, not only for the reputation of your conference, but it also has direct effect to the money that you can bring in. And that's rolled out, when I say $250,000, it's rolled out over 6 seasons. So you get that each of those 6 seasons for the wins that you get. Back to these 5 major conferences, the ACC. So their newest deal now pays, this is the total per member school in the ACC. And there's lots of talk right now that they're trying to renegotiate their deal to get a bigger deal because they're 5th of these 5 schools. So their total amount is $22 million per school. 331 million is the total contract. Bowl games, NCAA tournament, TV deals equal that total amount of 33 million. 331 million. Big 12 would be number 4. Their total for their member schools. Each school is getting 25.3 million. Pac-12, each school is getting 25.5 million. Big 10, each school is getting 27.6 million. To the SEC, each school is getting 34 million. So from bowl games, NCAA tournament. So as you can see, NCAA tournament is the smallest of these costs. It's the TV deals. So whoever that was that asked, what's the biggest, best? Oh, it was George, you asked, kind of what's the best. At the end of the day, you probably say the SEC, even though they've had, outside of Kentucky, which has a good basketball program, they haven't had a lot of success these last few years in basketball. It shows again that football is the king of college athletics. And there's your $34 million for each school. Hold on real quick, Nolan. One of my close friends was the former athletic director at San Diego State. His name was Jim Sturk. He went to Missouri. At Missouri, and he just said, this is the biggest difference between, he felt like even there at San Diego State was kind of a have-not. Again, I talked about Mountain West revenue, they're getting about 1.5 million versus being in the SEC, Missouri's in the SEC, $34 million. $34 million just from that versus $1.5 million at San Diego State. Yeah, no.
So the NCAA tournament, is that referring to basketball?
Basketball, just men's basketball.
So with that, NCAA still owns the.
You nailed it. So that's the only thing the NCAA owns though, is the basketball.
So is it the NCAA redistributing that money to
Correct.
these top teams?
Correct.
Because they, okay.
Correct. So they reap it all and then they dish it out. Where college football, it totally belongs to each of those bowl corporations.
Did the NCAA sell the bowl game?
They never had it.
They never had it.
Never had it. So one time it was the BCS, another time it was just individual bowls. They had tie-ins to individual bowls, but that's always been the fight. And there's no way the NCAA could claim it now. There's just way too much money. But it's also one of the challenges and one of the conversations that these 5 have had. Maybe we should just pull everything out. What if we created our own new division? That NCAA tournament thing would go away. I mean, it'd be tough for the NCAA and CBS and all their affiliates, True TV and TNT and all those that show the March Madness thing every March. They're not going to want an NCAA tournament without these 5 conferences in there. So that was kind of the resolution that came about 2 years ago or a year and a half ago. These Power 5 said, we'll stay in the NCAA. We'll continue to do this. Because one of the things that people like about March Madness is not these Power 5s. They like all the underdogs and the Cinderella stories that aren't from these 5 conferences. It's fun to cheer for Gonzaga or Butler against these teams. That's what makes the tournament. But you really need both to make it work. So the Power 5 said, all right, we'll stay in the NCAA, but we want to have way more control. So when we talked about 350 Division I schools, all these schools own the majority of votes to be able to change anything. These schools were frustrated because they were saying here at Division I, we have 350 schools. We have roughly 300 of them that control all the votes and get to determine everything. Yet the 50, 60 of us are the ones that have all the money. And so they changed some things around with the legislation and everything where these get multiple votes, each of these schools, to where they now have the majority of votes of anything that happens in the NCAA for Division I. Oh.
Do you think the 58 could be successful without the rest of them?
Probably, at the end of the day. The challenge is a little bit, and we're going to get into this with Title IX and other stuff. What do you do for your other sports? Like, is that enough? Do you want to have an association with just 50 or 60 schools? To me, you're kind of throwing away everything else. Not just the men's basketball, but we talked about it. Most of these schools have between 16 and 20 athletic programs. As much as football is kind of dominant, then why have an athletic department? Just have a football program.
So you mean just the quality of their other sports will go down against over to the NCAA, because they wouldn't have the same kind of level.
Yeah.
So right now.
And they don't wanna-
NCAA requirements
Yeah.
for the other sports.
And some of it, they don't wanna manage all that other stuff. You still, and that was a little bit of the argument, you still probably have to have a governing body that oversees somewhat of a level playing field for this. You know, you have to create a, you know, NACC, whatever your association is, to ensure eligibility and compliance. There's a lot of other things that they started looking into that were still gonna be costs to them. So I think this was a way they felt like they can kind of have their cake and eat it too. Good questions. Any others? Keep rolling along. Bottom line. This is just some numbers pulled. Pac-12 TV households viewing reaches 29 million TV households. LA's market. Obviously, a lot of times San Diego gets thrown in there with LA. Before we jump into Title IX, because part of our project is gonna you get to play athletic director at Point Loma, is picking a sport. As we get into that, just so you understand, and I release this too, this is on your canvas. This gives all Division II's expenses and revenues for different sports. I'm not gonna get into it. You can pull up anything you want. It's 1,000,000 pages here. 75 pages, but breaks down programs, what it essentially costs. It'll be a good resource for that project. Even getting kind of to Division II schools, I'm gonna pull up just this last article. Oops, not that. So a lot of the schools in California, some are Division II and some are Division I, but I just want to read this article from a year and a half ago. For Cal State athletic programs, budgets are slowly climbing. So since the recession, Cal State Los Angeles, which is a Division II university, is up 20% from 5 years ago. But finances are far from simple. The cost of the ever-elusive competitive edge may be rising at a quicker breakneck rate. Why don't we do this so I don't lose my voice? Let's all grab 2 paragraphs and read them. Elias, why don't you pick up for me courtesy? Read 2 paragraphs and then we'll go to James.
Courtesy of the escalating price and of tuition, the value of scholarship has nearly doubled during the past 10 years at Cal State schools. But the majority of sports can afford to offer anything approaching the maximum amount of scholarship allowed by the NCAA. Athletic directors are grateful to have pulled out of the post-recession budget most that force measures such as current force program and mandating workforce, but nobody is exactly painting a rosy picture of the current state of the government.
Go ahead, James.
I don't think anybody's back where they were before 07-08, said Long Beach State Athletic Director Vic Siegels. What's different for athletics is that it costs more for travel and lodging. Gas goes up. These are just the basics we have to pay just to compete. Cal Poly Pomona offers an average of 48% of the scholarship money allowed by the NCAA, but that isn't preventing its program from competing with the nation's best in Division II. Last season, the baseball team finished number 3 in the country a year after the women's basketball team reached the Final Four.
All right, I made it bigger. Why don't you go back there, Carlos?
Cal State LA gives nearly $900,000 a year in athletic scholarship.